Okay, so this is 2-1% of a number. Okay, so to find the percent of a number, write the percent as a fraction or a decimal first. It's kind of like step one. So if you're asked to find the percent of a number, take the percent and write it as either a fraction or a decimal. You decide which one's easier. But either write it as a fraction or a decimal.
Your T, find.
Is that an F or a T?
Okay, I'll read it again. To
like,
find
yeah.
the percent of a number, write the percent as a fraction or a decimal first. So in elementary school, in 5th and 6th grade, when we learned percentages, we learned how to write them as a fraction. Remember, we did this in our little artwork activity where we wrote them over 100. Okay? So you just take that number, put it over 100. So 3% would be 3 over 100. And then the decimal, remember we moved the decimal how many places? How many? 2, right? Okay? To the left. All right. If you have a whole number, you're moving it 2 places to the left. If you have it as the number, you move it 2 places as to the right to get the percentage again, right? Back and forth. So here's the first one. We need to find 5% of 300, and we're going to use a fraction. I'll show you how to do these with a fraction, and then later I'll show you how to do it with the decimal. But this first one, we're going to do it as a fraction. So 5% of 300 using a fraction. So how do I write 5% as a fraction? How?
5 over 100.
Good. 5 over 100. Can I simplify it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So 1 over 20. So that's the first step. And these will always be over 100, right? And step 2 is multiply. So you take the 1 over 20 and you multiply it by the 300 because we're trying to find 5% of 300. So basically that's just saying 300 divided by 20, right? 1/20th of 300. 300 divided by 20 is 15. So 5% of 300 is 15. Any questions on that one? That one's okay. Rebecca, question?
Yeah, if your numerator was more than 1, wouldn't you have to divide the denominator and then multiply the numerator?
Yeah, or you can multiply then divide. You can do either one. Okay? So now, let's try one where we have to write find 25% of 180 using a decimal. So that was the fraction, now let's try the decimal. 25% of 180 using a decimal. So remember, we moved the decimal 2 places to the left, so what would 25% be as a decimal? Okay, come back to that. What would 25% be as a decimal?
0.25.
Good. So we take 0.25, right? And we're going to multiply it by 180. .25, and just plug it into your calculator. Times 180 equals 45. 25% of 180 is 45. two different ways, and it doesn't matter which way you do this. If you do fractions or decimals, you should still be able to get the right answer. Question?
Technically, couldn't you just divide
By 4?
Just,
Yeah.
like you could do 180 divided by 25?
By 4. Because 25% is 1/4, 1/4, right? 1/4 of a number is dividing by 4. So some people do it that way, right? They're like, oh, I just know to divide by 4. Like when you guys go to the store and there's like 50% off sale, you just divide by 2, right? You don't go, oh, let me change this to a fraction or a decimal. You guys know 50% divide by 2. Just like you know when it's 25% off,
It's divided by
divide by 4. And what about 10% off?
4. Isn't it divided
Divide by 10, right? You do this already. But am I always going to give you perfect numbers like this? No. Okay. So I want you guys to try this one real quick. 40% of 70. I don't care if you use a decimal or a fraction. You may use a calculator. But you decide, do I want to make this a fraction or do I want to just make this a decimal? When you think you have it, raise your hand. If you think you know it, raise your hand. All right, Kendall, what'd you get?
28.
You're right. 28 is correct. Raise your hand if you got 28. Good. Did you guys use a decimal or a fraction here? Ooh, raise your hand for decimal. Raise your hand for fraction. Okay, either one worked. Decimal is probably a little bit easier. All right, try this one now. 15% of 100. Raise your hand when you have it. Okay, Michael, what'd you get? Jimmy?
15.
15. There's a shortcut, isn't there?
I had 50.
Nick saw it right away. He's like, wait, any number, any percent of 100 is just that number. Right?
What?
Oh, I forgot about that.
Oh.
I didn't even know that.
Any percent of 100 is just whatever that number is in front of the percent. Because it's out of 100. Right? And we said already percent means per hundredth, right? The number out of 100. Yes?
You put like 80, comma 25% of 180. Like why do you
This
do
is this is not 80, it's so.
the 80? Oh.
Okay. Try this one. Last one. 75% of 280. Raise your hand as soon as you think you know it. 75% of 280. Raise your hand if you think you know it. Looking for some more hands. Alex C., what'd you say?
210.
210 is right. Raise your hand if you got 210.
Yeah, please.
Good. Alex, did you use a decimal or did you use a
Decimal.
fraction? You used a decimal. That's what I would do. Anyone use a fraction? That's okay too, right? But if you used a fraction, then it was 3/4 and you had to multiply by 3 and divide by 4, right? So it's like an extra step. If you use a decimal, it's just 0.75 times 250, or 280, sorry. So it's a little bit easier. Okay, so sometimes you'll see that. You'll start to see what's better. Might be better to use a fraction when you know 1 is in the numerator. But if you know 1's not in the numerator, maybe use a decimal. Okay? Any questions on that? All right, next page. We have a situation where sometimes we get percents greater than 100. Okay, percents that are greater than 100, like 110% is greater than 100. So what we have to do is change it into improper fractions, mixed fractions, or decimals. Thank you. Okay, so we have to change it into improper fractions, mixed fractions, or decimals if that happens. There. Okay? So percent greater than 100, we're going to use either improper fraction, mixed fraction, or decimal. Still the same with fractions and decimals, but they look different. So the first example I show you is 150%. So what you do is you still put it over 100. You can simplify, divide by 50, right? If you divide by 50, you get 3/2. So that's my improper fraction. If I want to use a mixed fraction, then that'd be 1.5. If I want to use a decimal, that'd be 1.5. So improper, mixed, decimal. Still the same process. You still multiply it by the number. But you decide, do I want to use an improper fraction, do I want to use a mixed fraction, or do I want to use a decimal? How many people in here would use a mixed fraction? Really?
Wait,
Truly?
like,
You would use a mixed fraction?
Mixed fraction's pretty easy.
You think?
Yeah.
Normally people hate mixed fractions.
I mean, like,
But okay.
Which one is mixed?
The mixed is like 1.5.
Oh,
It's,
never mind.
yeah,
Never
no.
mind. I'm gonna get the
Yeah.
I'm
I
sticking
would
with
think
mixed
about it, like let's say it wasn't 150, because I think that's like really easy.
Yeah.
And say it was like 128, and I just think about it as take away 100 because that's a whole. And
Right.
You get 28 over 100, and that would be.
Okay, that's a good way to think about it. All right. Here's an example, guys. I want you to find 120% of 75 using a fraction. So I'm telling you, you have to use a fraction on this one. 120% of 75 using a fraction. So the first step is to change the 120 into a fraction. So we put that over 100. We can simplify, right? We can divide by 20. Divide by 20 to get 6/5. You can do this. I'm not saying this is the easiest way to do this one. I'm just showing you how you could do this one. So we have 120 over 100 equals 6/5. We take the 6/5 and we multiply that by 75. Okay? So this is where I wouldn't do it this way, but this is, if you did it this way, this is how you would do it. You would go 6 times 75 divided by 5, or 75 divided by 5 times 6. It doesn't matter, but you should get 90. Okay? So here's a tip for you. If you're doing a percent greater than 100, your number, your answer, should be bigger than your original number. Okay? Because it's more than 100%. But I can't tell you how many times this is on a quiz and I'll get a number over here like 50. It'll be less than the original number. So you have to use some number sense here. You have to think, oh, it's going to be bigger. It's more than 100%. So whatever answer you get must be bigger than your original number. Just keep in mind, that's a good way you can check your work, right? If you're getting a smaller number, you better go back and see what you did wrong. you have a question, Zach? You're stretching.
I think both, but how did you get like 90?
6 times 75 divided by 5. Put it in your calculator. All right. Here's how we do this with a decimal, which I think is easier when you get these mixed fractions, or I mean these, improper fractions. I'd rather use a decimal. So 150% of 28, we're going to use a decimal. What is 150% as a decimal? What is it? 1.5, right? 2 spaces. 1, 2, 1.5. Okay? 2 spaces to the left makes it 1.5. So we take 1.5, we times 28. Question? Okay, just wait. Times it by 28. 1.5 times 28 is 42. Now I look at my answer and I go, oh, okay, is 42 bigger than 28? Yes, so I know I'm doing this right. 42 is bigger than 28, and it should be because this is more than 100%. Yeah. You probably did not put the 1.5 in your calculator.
Oh, you're supposed to be using a calculator?
Well, you can. You could use your brain. You know how to multiply these things, but it's easier. Yeah.
When you see that on 150, just adding half of it.
You could add half of it. So if you see the shortcuts, use them. Fine with me. If you don't see the shortcut, don't use it. Use the method. All right, so I want you guys to try this one. You try 150% of 20. If you see the shortcut, you're already done.
Would this be a decimal?
You decide.
I already know it.
If you want to use a fraction, use a fraction. If you want to use a decimal, use a decimal. But raise your hand when you have the answer.
I already know it.
Lots of hands went up pretty fast.
We seen the.
Nina, what'd you get?
30.
30 is right. Raise your hand if you got 30. Good. Did you guys use a fraction or a decimal? Probably because we just did that, or a shortcut.
Can you do a mixed
I
fraction?
didn't
Yeah.
I use my
All right.
Wait, if it was a mixed fraction, wouldn't it be 1.5?
No.
Like, right?
Nope.
Simplify that by 50.
You get 30.
All right. So look, 1.5 times 20 is 30. 1.5 times 20 is 30. All right. Check it out in your calculator. Make sure your calculator matches the answer. Come back to you. Just wait. All right. Try this one. 160% of 35. You decide. Do I want to use a fraction, mixed fraction, decimal? What do I want to use? Raise your hand when you have it. Not as easy to do the shortcut here because you're like, oh, wait a minute.
I know.
Sorta.
No, I don't think it's short.
Oh. Raise your hand when you think you have it. Bryce. What'd you get? Yeah, because we know it needs to be bigger than 35. So check your work. Check your work. Shh. Rihanna. Yeah. 56. So we do 1.6 times 35. You didn't put the point in. Okay? 1.6 times 35. Okay, so we're not done practicing. But we're done with the notes. But we're going to do some practice in the workbook now.